10 years into our decision to remain childless, Matthew cheated. His mistress, Melissa, pregnant, looked at me and said, "Since you don't want to have kids, then step aside." Her words hit me like a wave, and for a moment I was dazed. Why did I even agree to being childless in the first place? Oh, right. During our pre-marriage health check, Matthew was diagnosed with infertility. To protect his pride, I hid the report and lied, telling him that I simply didn't want kids, that I preferred a child-free life. Matthew, full of guilt, said, "Elena, I love you, but I really want to have a child." I quietly filed for divorce. Now I wonder, when should I send him the infertility report I kept hidden all these years? Matthew's mistress is Melissa Swan, and I know her too. She's the new secretary at Matthew's company, just out of college. Young and beautiful. When I got her call, I wasn't surprised in the least. In the cafe, she sat there, heavily pregnant, smugly telling me, "You see it for yourself. I'm pregnant and the baby's Matthew's. I heard you insisted on being childless. You're so selfish. If you don't want kids, don't drag Matthew down with you. If you don't want to have kids, then step aside." I felt a wave of dizziness trying to recall, why did I even agree to being childless? Oh, I remember now. It was during our premarital health check when Matthew found out he was infertile. To protect his pride, I hid the report and lied, saying I didn't like children and wanted a child-free life. I looked at Melissa with a complex expression. Finally, my gaze dropped to the coffee in front of her. "Since you're pregnant, maybe you should drink less coffee. Have some milk instead." With that, I stood up and left. I went back to my parents' house and pulled out the old health report from the deepest corner of the closet. Looking at Matthew's infertility diagnosis, I couldn't help but laugh, releasing all the pent-up frustration as my parents stared at me, confused. I already knew about Matthew's affair. He wasn't clever enough to hide it. There were cracks everywhere. At first, it was the sudden influx of messages on his phone, then the increasingly frequent late nights at work, and eventually, it became too obvious to ignore. The scent of perfume on his clothes that wasn't mine. The movie tickets in his pocket I'd never seen, and the lipstick under the passenger seat. I thought about confronting him, making a scene, but in the end I did nothing. 10 years of marriage. What had once been a burning passion had worn down under the weight of daily life, the constant pressure from his parents to have a child, and his growing impatience with me. If there was anything worth holding on to in this marriage, it was that when I first suggested being childless, he agreed. To me, that meant he loved me and cared about my opinions and decisions. But that no longer mattered the moment I found out about his affair. One ordinary day after dinner, I calmly said to him, "Melissa came to see me a few days ago." He looked at me, his face showing no guilt, no panic, just calmly saying, "Oh." Hearing that "oh" erased any last trace of hesitation in me. I told him, "Let's get a divorce." We started the divorce proceedings. I didn't want the house, so he just transferred me the money as half of the estimated market price, along with the savings in the house, $1 million in total. To gather that amount, I'm sure he drained his small company's working capital. On the day of the divorce, Matthew said, "Elena, I love you, but my parents are getting old and I really want to have a child." He kept implying that while he had cheated, it wasn't really his fault. I didn't say anything, just nodded in full understanding. But in my heart, I couldn't wait for him to find out the truth. When we picked up the divorce certificate from the state court, Melissa was waiting at the door. The moment she saw Matthew and me, she proudly stuck out her belly like a challenge. She was holding a piece of paper, an appointment slip for marriage registration at the city hall. Matthew noticed my gaze fall on the paper and said, "There are a lot of documents to take care of once the baby's born. Having a marriage certificate would make things easier." I couldn't help but laugh. "You don't need to explain. It's none of my business." "Congratulations," I said, addressing Melissa. Matthew smiled. "Thanks, Elena." Melissa snorted, tugging at him. "Our turn's up soon. Let's go, we don't want to waste time." I watched them walk away, smiling but saying nothing. I got into a cab and headed straight to the airport. After the divorce, I also resigned from my job. With money and freedom, I deserved a trip just for myself. Who knows, maybe I'd even have a chance encounter a handsome guy along the way. I flew to San Francisco, a city I had long dreamed of visiting. In the heart of the city, strolling around the Golden Gate Bridge, with the sea breeze in my hair and indulging in authentic local cuisine, All memories of Matthew seemed to fade away. Life after the divorce brought me a sense of freedom I had never known, and it allowed me to slowly begin reflecting on my inner desires and planning my future. I spent a pleasant evening in a small tavern, having a few drinks and chatting with some men who had struck up conversations with me. When I walked back to the hotel alone, my head was a bit light, but my heart was clear. I didn't regret a thing. I was simply wondering what kind of future awaited me. As I was walking leisurely, ready to return to the hotel, a muffled sound of crying caught my attention. I turned and saw a man sitting on the steps of a street corner, his hands covering his face, exuding an air of someone deep in sorrow. The yellowish light from a nearby street lamp glinted off the ring on his finger, subtly gleaming like a reminder of some lost memory. I frowned slightly, shook my head and muttered to myself, I must be drunk, seeing someone crying and thinking I should get involved. I walked closer to him, hesitated for a moment and then, feeling a sudden impulse, asked, Did your wife cheat on you? What's there to cry about? The man looked up, his eyes still teary, glaring at me with anger. My wife didn't cheat, he said, his voice tinged with helpless sorrow. Oh, sorry, I said, giving a nervous laugh. I sat down beside him, trying to think of something to say. His story intrigued me. Eventually I spent some time chatting with him. The man's name was Alexander Brown, and like me, he was from New Orleans. He told me that he and his wife had never been able to have children because she had severe heart disease and was unable to conceive. They had always loved kids and planned to adopt. But no one could have predicted that just a month ago his wife had passed away from a simple flu, leaving him all alone. The San Francisco trip that had been planned for the two of them was now a journey he was taking alone. Hearing his story, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for him, and I started sharing my own. We were both searching for a future of our own, yet each of us carried painful burdens we couldn't escape. You shouldn't hide what you want to please others, he said after a long pause, his voice quiet but firm. You should pursue what you want, not let others decide for you. I nodded, a trace of determination in my eyes. Maybe. But I don't need his guilt or gratitude. What I want is pure love. I took a deep breath and added quietly, right now I really want a child. That's another reason I came to San Francisco. The hospitals here have more advanced IVF technology. I told him that although there were many opportunities here, there were still practical issues to face. I'd eventually need to return to New Orleans. And New Orleans had stricter laws for single mothers, especially those without partners. Many things would be difficult. And children need a father when they grow up, even if it's just in name. I forced a smile, though my heart wasn't light. You also considered adoption, right? Suddenly an idea struck me. As a single man, the adoption process would be difficult for you and the chances of success are low. What if we had a marriage of convenience? We could try raising a child together if you don't mind. I paused, looking at him seriously. I need a formal marriage. And you need a child. I can help fulfill the wish you and your wife Pence had, and you can provide support for the child as they grow. I extended my hand, locking eyes with him. What do you think? Shall we cooperate? Alexander looked at me for a while, deep in thought, and finally he extended his hand, agreeing earnestly, a pleasure to cooperate. He would return to New Orleans to handle some matters, while I stayed in San Francisco, my heart filled with anticipation for the future. At the sperm bank in San Francisco, I carefully selected a biological father for my child. A man of Nordic descent, 6'3" and a Harvard graduate. 3 months after leaving New Orleans, I returned not alone, but with a tiny life growing inside me. The entire experience felt both miraculous and exciting. When I arrived back in my hometown, I barely had a moment to rest before I was bombarded with my parents' questions. You've got some nerve. You handled something this big without telling us? Do we even matter to you? Having a child isn't simple. There's feeding, changing, and all kinds of things to worry about. How are you going to raise this child on your own? Matthew's a bastard, fine, you divorced him, but why let yourself go like this? Oh, he has a child now and you're going to have one too. I must have really lost my mind because when I heard that last comment, I blurted out without thinking, Matthew's child isn't his. My mom froze, her words stopped abruptly, then she shot me an incredulous look. Not his? What do you mean? Explain yourself, she pressed, her tone urgent. My dad, equally stunned, looked at me in disbelief. I had already let the secret slip, so there was no point hiding anything anymore. I told them about Matthew's infertility. His sperm count is 0. I asked the doctor. There's no cure. My mom's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Finally, she burst out laughing so hard she started crying. My dad joined in laughing as well. Good for him. Karma. When they finally stopped laughing, my mom asked, I heard that mistress of his is about to give birth. When are you going to tell Matthew? I gently rubbed my belly. No rush. We'll wait for the baby to be born. Let Matthew enjoy the experience of being a father. The deeper Matthew's connection with that child, the more powerful the impact of that infertility report would be. After returning home, my contact with Alexander became more frequent. After all, our agreed-upon marriage involved the birth registration of the child, legal paperwork, and a series of follow-up arrangements. Every time we met, we would go over some documents or discuss the next steps. And these interactions allowed me to gradually get to know him better. At first, we remained distant, operating purely as business partners. Our conversations were always rational and goal-oriented, much like colleagues working on a project. But as time passed, especially with the baby's birth drawing nearer, our interactions became more frequent. We started going out together to shop for baby supplies, attending parenting classes, and slowly the boundaries between us began to blur. The connection we had once purely formal seemed to shift, and we grew closer, both physically and emotionally. Alexander began taking on more responsibilities, and I realized he wasn't just a calm, rational partner. He was a man with a strong sense of responsibility and patience. His care for the unborn child and me made me feel an unexpected warmth inside. One evening, while we were organizing the baby's room, his hand accidentally brushed against mine. It was just a fleeting touch, but in that moment I felt an unexpected jolt. His gaze shifted too, and I could sense a subtle change. It was then that I realized, what I was feeling wasn't just the relationship of partners. It had evolved into something deeper, something beyond friendship and obligation. However, despite the growing connection, I still wasn't ready to fully embrace it. My past had left a lasting impact on me. Matthew had once given me countless illusions. I believed in his promises only to be met with disappointment time and again. Now I was afraid to dive into another emotional whirlwind, especially when things were starting to feel blurry. I wasn't ready to risk that kind of betrayal again. One day my mom casually remarked, "The way you and Alexander are now, it's not really like a marriage. Feels more like a partnership." She then tentatively asked, "He's a good guy. Since you're married, why not try to develop some feelings for him? Maybe you could build a life together." Her words struck a chord with me. Indeed, over the past few months, I had realized that Alexander wasn't just my partner by contract. His care for me and the baby had given me a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time, even making me feel a sense of dependence. But even with this, I wasn't ready to fully let go of my past and open myself up to a new beginning. I forced a smile, replying softly, "Mom, I just want to have a child. Marrying Alexander is for the sake of the baby. It'll make things easier for raising him. Plus, it gives him a father figure. Someone who can offer him love and attention as he grows. So, don't think about anything else." My mom seemed a little disappointed but didn't press further. She just sighed quietly. On the other hand, my dad was more open-minded. He patted my shoulder and smiled. "From now on, our grandchild will be part of our family. Elena, you can stay with us as long as you like. As for Alexander, he'll just be like a close relative. Nothing wrong with that." I couldn't help but laugh and gave him a thumbs up. "Dad, you're brilliant." When I was 7 months pregnant, I went to the hospital for a routine checkup. After finishing all the tests, I never expected to run into Matthew in the hallway. He was talking on the phone, his voice full of excitement. "He's born last night. Yeah, it's a boy, 7.5 pounds. He exchanged a few more pleasantries on the phone before hanging up with a big smile on his face. That's when he noticed me. "Elena." I smiled and said, "Congratulations, Sunha. Must be quite a joy." He cleared his throat and said, "Thanks." Then he asked, "What are you here for?" I didn't say much. "Just a checkup." His eyes instinctively darted to my swollen belly and then to the doctor/'s office door, which had a sign reading "Assisted Reproduction." "Your health." "Well, there's nothing wrong. Medical technology is so advanced these days, there are many ways to have children. When he said this, his gaze mixed with sympathy and pride. I almost burst out laughing. You're right, I replied, but no matter how advanced medicine gets, there are some things that can't be fixed. Like his infertility. Like his unfounded assumptions. After 10 years of marriage, Matthew and I had many mutual friends in our social circle. Through them, I learned that Matthew threw a huge christening party for his son. The party favors for the guests were all luxury perfumes. On Instagram, many of our mutual friends posted photos from that day. Matthew's parents were beaming with joy, holding their long-awaited grandson who was chubby and rosy-cheeked, wearing an expensive bracelet from his grandparents. Melissa, still slim, was holding onto Matthew's arm. I couldn't help but feel a pang of envy. Youth is truly a gift. I hoped that after giving birth, I could bounce back as quickly as Melissa. I signed up for prenatal yoga. After class, I went shopping with a few other pregnant women. At the entrance of a maternity store, I ran into Matthew again. Is this the only maternity store in town? Thought to myself. He was stunned as he stared at my noticeably swollen belly and the bottle I was holding. His voice even cracked. You're pregnant. Then, as if remembering something, his face shifted from shock to joy and he quickly asked, How many months? Why didn't you tell me? I calmly responded, Matthew, we've been divorced for almost a year. I'm 8 months pregnant now, and this child has nothing to do with you. I rolled my eyes. I had told him before. His imagination was a sickness. He quickly realized the timeline didn't add up and his face turned awkward. But then it shifted to a deep shade of anger. He gritted his teeth and said, You moved on so fast, got married and had a baby just 2 months after our divorce? Elena, you're something else. I raised my voice. Matthew, on the day we divorced, you went and got a marriage certificate with your pregnant mistress. And now you're acting like the innocent victim. People around us immediately turned to gawk at him with curious eyes. His face went pale and he quickly left. Wow sis, you're a badass, a young guy whistled at me. I couldn't help but laugh, then strutted out of the mall like I had just won a victory. Since then, I never saw Matthew again. I spent my days happily focused on my pregnancy, living a life of peace and comfort. Meanwhile, my relationship with Alexander gradually grew deeper. We worked together to create a loving and warm home for the child who was about to arrive. Before every checkup, as my due date drew closer, Alexander always accompanied me. When we looked at the ultrasound and saw the baby moving with such energy, Alexander's face always lit up with a warm smile. And as I watched him looking at the baby, I couldn't help but think about why I chose this path in the first place. To give this child a happy home with both a loving father and mother. Though our relationship began out of necessity, I slowly realized that I could no longer ignore the subtle feelings growing between us. Every time he looked at me with tenderness, every time he was so considerate, I started to question whether I could still maintain that emotional distance and rationality I had worked so hard to uphold. Despite this, I carefully avoided allowing our feelings to progress further. The pain from my past still kept me on guard. I needed more time to observe, to feel, to make sure that this new emotion was worth letting go of all my past fears and pursuing true happiness. Even though I continually reminded myself not to overthink things, I couldn't help but notice that my relationship with Alexander was becoming more and more complicated. Every act of kindness he did for me and the baby, every simple smile, every exchange of glances, made my heart stir. I wanted to give myself more time to truly understand Alexander, to see if he could bring true stability and happiness to both me and the child. After all, my past pain had made me cautious, but maybe, through gradual connection and understanding, this new emotion could help me find the answers I was seeking. I was almost 9 months pregnant already. My dad was constantly flipping through books, coming up with dozens of names, but none of them seemed right. My mom had also started early on baby food recipes and was even taking online courses on parenting. Alexander was always by my side, doing everything he could to support me. After much anticipation from the whole family, the day finally arrived. I had been in labor all night, but just before dawn, I finally gave birth to my child. It was a boy, healthy and adorable. Holding him in my arms was an indescribable feeling of satisfaction. Alexander had prepared a beautiful gift for the baby, 2 delicate bracelets. He also gave our son a beautiful name, Benjamin, meaning a life of peace and prosperity. My mom, seeing me and Alexander sitting together with the baby in our arms, opened her mouth as if to say something but hesitated. Just as she was about to speak, Benjamin started crying and she was immediately distracted, her full attention focused on him. I pretended not to notice, though deep down I couldn't help but feel a sense of warmth and happiness I hadn't known in a long time. However, before I could fully enjoy this peaceful time, I heard news that Matthew and Melissa were on the verge of getting a divorce. Before I could even think about taking action, had Melissa's affair already been exposed. I reached out to a friend who had good relationships with both Matthew and me to inquire, and he told me, Melissa took kickbacks from a supplier. The goods she ordered were of poor quality, and the clients returned them. Matthew's going to lose over $1 million on this order, and he's so furious that he wants to divorce her and sever ties. But Melissa wants to keep the child, so she's threatening Matthew for a larger divorce settlement. This is far from over. I couldn't help but sneer at the news. These two really were a perfect match, calculating and tormenting each other. Benjamin was changing every day. Just yesterday he was a little baby who only knew how to eat and sleep, but today he was crawling around the house, getting into everything. He was so curious and energetic. I had made plans for the future. After the divorce, Matthew had given me $1 million, and even though Alexander insisted on helping cover many of my expenses for the IVF and baby supplies, I had still felt too conflicted to accept much from him. Most of the time I declined his offers, so by now I had already spent more than $200,000 of my savings. After discussing it with my parents, I used $500,000 to make a down payment on a new house. The rest of the money I invested in flexible financial products to handle future daily expenses. I also decided not to go back to work but instead used the connections I had built during my career to take on freelance translation projects. The flexible hours meant I could better take care of Benjamin and the household. By the time Benjamin turned 8 months old, he was already crawling around the house. Meanwhile, I heard that Matthew and Melissa still hadn't divorced, and that Melissa was pregnant with their second child. Hearing that news made me laugh. I had originally planned to wait for Matthew and Melissa's divorce to finalize, get the custody, and then send him the infertility report. But since they hadn't divorced yet, maybe it would be best to wait until the second child was born. I found out that after the kickback scandal, Melissa quit her job and became a full-time housewife. She spent her days at the spa and shopping, living an extravagant life. As for Matthew, he was working overtime day and night to make up for the loss caused by that order. It was really ironic. Fate had a funny way of turning things around. Karma wasn't slow, it just took its time. Benjamin changed every day. Just a short while ago he was a baby who only knew how to eat and sleep. Now he was a little troublemaker crawling all over the place. By the time he could stand for a few seconds and babble mama and Melissa's second child had already reached the 1-month mark. Matthew sent out the electronic invitations, not forgetting to include me. When I saw the date and venue in the email, I decided it was time to finish what I had started. On the day of the child's christening, I put on a new dress, did my makeup carefully, sprayed some perfume and brought a beautifully wrapped gift box tied with a ribbon. When I arrived, the atmosphere was just right. Matthew was holding his firstborn and Melissa was holding their second child, both posing for pictures. I scanned the room and recognized almost everyone there. When they saw me, they looked a bit uncomfortable. The chandelier in the banquet hall sparkled, casting a holy glow on Matthew, who looked every bit the proud father. I watched the 1-year-old in his arms. The child was at that adorable age, and from Matthew's social media I could see how much he loved him. Seeing me staring at the child, Matthew instinctively adjusted his hold, turning the baby's back to me, almost as if afraid I would harm him. I smiled. With Melissa watching me warily, I walked up and handed the gift box to Matthew. "This is for you." He took it with confusion and was about to pass it to Melissa. I spoke up, "Matthew, you'd better open it now personally. You'll be in for a big surprise." I emphasized now and personally, making sure he understood how important this moment was. Matthew handed the baby over to his mom, who struggled to pull the child away, the little one clinging to him and making a fuss. He spent a long time trying to calm him down. Such a loving father. Finally he opened the box. Inside was an old, yellowed piece of paper. He took it out and unfolded it, his eyes scanning the contents. I watched him closely, noting the shift in his expression, from confusion and curiosity to shock and finally to anger. His hand trembled as he held the report and he was breathing heavily. I was worried he might collapse any second. He looked at me, his mouth moving as if he wanted to ask me something. But seeing my composed and confident expression, he immediately understood everything. Matthew turned sharply and slapped Melissa hard across the face. "Bitch," he yelled. The impact stunned Melissa, and her face instantly swelled up. She quickly recovered, screaming, "Matthew, you hit me!" In a flash, she shoved the child into someone else's arms and lunged at Matthew, starting to fight him. Both children began crying loudly, terrified by the scene unfolding before them. I watched in sheer delight. Another slap landed on Melissa's face, this time leaving it red and swollen on the other side. "You lying slut. All you know is spread your legs to seduce men." I had never heard Matthew use such crude language. It was unbearable to listen to. Melissa, her long, sharp nails freshly done, raked them across Matthew's face, leaving deep scratches in their wake. "You dare hit me," she screamed. "I'll kill you." Despite her threats, she was still a woman, recently having given birth, and it didn't take long for Matthew to overpower her. The only sounds left were her painful, blood-curdling screams. The people around them quickly reacted, worried that Matthew might go too far, so a few of his brothers rushed to pull him off. But as they dragged him away, Matthew kicked at Melissa and continued cursing her, his rage far from abating. I picked up the report that had fallen to the ground, dusted it off, and smoothed out the creases before placing it into Matthew's mother's hands. Then I turned and walked away. After a few steps, I heard someone collapse behind me, but I didn't stop. The bomb I had planted 10 years ago was now detonated. I had held on to its fuse for so long, but today I finally let go. And just as I had hoped, it exploded with a bang. It was beautiful to hear. Matthew's mother passed out in a fit of rage and had to be rushed to the hospital. As I walked out of the hotel doors, the cool night breeze brushed against my face, a mix of complicated emotions swirling inside me, but somehow feeling lighter. Just then I heard a familiar voice call out, "Elena." I turned around and saw Alexander standing outside the hotel walking toward me. His face showed little expression, but I could see a hint of concern in his eyes. "What's wrong? You don't look well." His voice was low and gentle with a touch of worry. I paused for a moment, realizing that I might actually be feeling a bit off. I had stayed calm through the scene with Matthew and Melissa, but inside, a storm had been brewing. I nodded slightly and tried to force a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired." Alexander closed the distance between us, placing his hand gently on my shoulder, his tone soft and caring. "You know, if you ever need anything, I'll always be here." His words warmed my heart. Although our relationship was still based on an agreement, the way he spoke and his concern made me feel like it was something deeper than I had expected. I looked up at him, feeling a little calmer, and softly said, "Thank you, Alexander. I'm fine. Everything that happened today. It's just that Matthew and Melissa deserve it." Alexander looked at me, his eyes full of sympathy and understanding. He nodded before speaking again. "Yes, they do. But you don't have to let their mistakes weigh on you anymore. You already built a new life for yourself and Benjamin." He paused for a moment, then added, "No matter what happens, I'll be here taking care of you and Benjamin." I lowered my head, took a deep breath, and felt the warmth radiating from Alexander's presence. I knew this care was genuine. And for the first time I began to understand that our relationship was no longer just a formality. I gently hugged Alexander, feeling him freeze for a brief moment, then immediately wrap his arms around me. "Thank you, Alexander," I whispered. "I really appreciate it." He smiled softly, tightening his embrace just a little. The calmness and tenderness on his face made me feel even more at ease. "You don't need to thank me, Elena. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together." I nodded, a sense of stability growing in my heart. Despite the scars from my past that made me afraid to fully open up again, in this new chapter of my life, maybe it was time to let go of my fears and embrace the future ahead. In the hotel, no one paid attention to Melissa, but the restaurant staff, fearing responsibility, called 911 and had her sent to the hospital. While Melissa was still lying in the hospital bed, she was forced to write a settlement agreement. Matthew was held for 5 days, but after posting bail he was released with only a warning. Is that it? My mom was furious. Melissa was seriously injured and they only kept him for 5 days? I wasn't angry at all. I had expected this. What else can they do? She wrote the settlement agreement, the bail was paid, and she doesn't even want a divorce. What can the police really do? That woman could cheat on Matthew, have his child, and now she's still trying to hold on to him. Why doesn't she show some backbone? Matthew, that jerk, deserves a few years in prison. My mom's expression was full of disbelief at how Melissa was handling things. I couldn't help but smile wryly. Melissa played her cards the way she did, but she didn't have the backbone to stand up for herself, surrounded by a family that only drained her, holding her back at every turn. The private investigator's report on her said that her family wasn't well off. After graduating from high school, Melissa attended a vocational school, with her family only covering tuition. She had worked hard to support herself through part-time jobs. After graduating, her beauty and youth landed her a job as a receptionist at Matthew's company, where she set her sights on him. Once Melissa hooked Matthew, her family, like flies to honey, quickly caught on and took advantage of her success. It was her parents who pressured her to accept kickbacks from suppliers to buy them a house. And this time, her father had forced her to write the settlement agreement after being hospitalized. But Matthew wasn't doing any better. The whole incident had caused a massive scandal. Everyone now knew he couldn't have children and was raising someone else's. Many people had started asking questions and seeking information from me. I wasn't surprised when I saw Matthew blocking my way downstairs. He glared at me, his voice full of venom. "Elena, you're really ruthless." His clothes were wrinkled, smelling of smoke and alcohol, his eyes darkened with fatigue. And stubble dotted his chin. He looked utterly drained, as if every ounce of energy had been drained from him. "You knew all along that the kids weren't mine. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He growled in frustration. "Did you already hook up with your new lover? Just to be with your lover, you're really something. We were together for 10 years, Elena. Don't you have a heart? Is this how you repay me?" He was getting more and more worked up, veins bulging on his temples, his eyes bloodshot. I stepped back, putting some distance between us, then asked calmly, "Matthew, shouldn't I be happy? You cheated and I got my revenge. Is there something wrong with that? If it's revenge, then I'm going to make it as ruthless as possible. How dare you come here and question me? Maybe you should think about how to deal with your 2 precious sons." I threw the words at him, each one a jab. The phrase "precious sons" hit a raw nerve. It's all your fault. He shot back, "You hid the truth from me for 10 years. I shook my head. "It wouldn't have changed anything, Matthew. If I had told you the truth back then, we would have still gotten married. But you would have never admitted you were infertile. You needed to save face." He froze at my words, the truth cutting through him. I painted another possibility, one based on the reality of our 10 years together. I loved you, so I protected you. I kept quiet about the truth. We would have still said we chose to be childless, but your parents would have continued pushing us to have kids. At first you'd have stood by me out of guilt, but eventually you'd have grown numb. You would have left me to handle your parents alone. You'd have grown impatient, tried to avoid the issue, and convinced yourself it wasn't a big deal after all these years. He countered, "That's not true. If I knew from the start, we could have done IVF just like you did and no one would have ever known." "You would have known," I said calmly, "and you would have felt like that child wasn't really yours, that I wasn't clean anymore. You'd have felt off balance and you'd still have cheated." My voice was steady as I stated, "No matter which scenario, your infidelity was inevitable." I sneered. "Matthew, admit it. You're just a spineless scumbag." The words "spineless" hit him hard, and his eyes reddened with fury. "Elena, I won't let you get away with this." I wasn't afraid of his threat, not with my loving family and the constant support from Alexander. What I hadn't expected, though, was that the seemingly polite and well-mannered Alexander actually ran a security company. I only found out after returning to New Orleans and signing an agreement with him. He'd arranged for one of his company's strongest and most capable bodyguards to be by my side, just in case anything happened during my pregnancy. It seemed that he had been preparing for all possibilities in advance. To ensure that Matthew would have no time to bother me, I decided to help Melissa in a way. I privately contacted the best divorce lawyer in the city and offered to cover the majority of her legal fees, as long as she agreed not to divorce Matthew. Without hesitation she agreed. Melissa had just given birth to her second child, still in the postpartum period, and Matthew, as the husband, wasn't in a strong position to file for divorce at that time. He could only either settle through a mutual agreement or file a lawsuit. Naturally, Melissa refused to divorce him, leaving Matthew with no choice but to file for a lawsuit. The lawyer he hired for such an expensive fee proved to be worth every penny. In court he argued that although the child wasn't Matthew's biological son, there was no problem in their relationship. The lawyer emphasized that the couple had been willing to cheat to stay together, proving their love for each other. After marrying Matthew, Melissa had cut ties with everyone else and didn't even know the child wasn't Matthew's. This showed that she had always loved him and wasn't trying to hide anything. He also mentioned that despite the huge financial loss Matthew had suffered at work, he still wanted to stay with Melissa, working hard to rebuild for her. How could their relationship be broken? To top it off, the lawyer presented Matthew's shopping list in court: nurse uniforms, stewardess outfits, sexy lingerie, adult toys. It was an eclectic mix. Even though the child wasn't Matthew's biological son, everyone had loved the child before finding out the truth. This, the lawyer argued, showed that legally and emotionally Matthew's family had accepted the child. The verdict in the first trial was announced. The grounds for divorce were invalid and the divorce petition was rejected. When I saw the news pop up on my phone, I happily opened a bottle of champagne. Melissa was no slouch either. She knelt down in front of Matthew, holding both kids in her arms, and publicly promised to live a good life with him from then on, begging him to forgive her. The video was filmed by onlookers in the courtroom and quickly circulated online. In the video, Melissa was crying with tear-streaked cheeks, saying, "As long as you forgive me, I'll do anything. The kid's father is you. They only recognize you. Please don't abandon us." The younger child could only cry, but the older one reached out to Matthew, calling out, "Daddy," repeatedly, confused about why he wasn't being hugged. The comments quickly started to shift. "Since the jerk can't have kids, isn't it better that he got two for free? The kids are innocent. Does blood relation really matter that much? The mistress is shameless, they can divorce but let the kids stay." I glanced at the comments before putting my phone down. My mom, however, was thoroughly engrossed. I had to admit Melissa's use of public opinion was a clever move. And in the shadows, I remained the one who set the stage for all of it, quietly claiming my success. As I watched Benjamin take his first unsteady steps, I felt a quiet joy I hadn't known I could experience. He was growing up so fast and Alexander was right there beside him, cheering him on like the proudest father in the world. I had never imagined that this quiet domestic happiness would become my reality. It was moments like this that made me realize how much my life had changed, not just in the way it looked but in the way I felt. What had started as a contract, a simple arrangement, had turned into something real. Something I didn't expect. Alexander had become more than just a partner. He was my family. And in these quiet moments with our son between us, I finally understood what it meant to truly belong. "Come on, buddy, you can do it," Alexander encouraged as Benjamin wobbled toward him. I knelt beside them, my heart swelling with pride as I watched my son giggle, taking his next step. It felt like everything I'd been through, every hardship, every betrayal, had led me here. Meanwhile, Matthew and Melissa's lives were falling apart. Despite their failed attempt to divorce, their marriage remained a war zone with constant fighting and resentment. Matthew's company had gone bankrupt, his reputation in tatters. Melissa, ever the manipulator, kept playing the victim. But her actions only pushed Matthew further away. Their family was broken and it made me grateful for the peace I had found. I didn't need anything else. I had Alexander, Benjamin, and a future filled with love. I had chosen to let go of my past, and in doing so I'd found something real. "Thank you," I whispered to Alexander one evening as we sat together, watching Benjamin sleep soundly in his crib. "For being here. For making me believe in something better." Alexander smiled softly, squeezing my hand. "We're in this together, Elena. Boys." And for the first time in my life, I truly believed him. The storm had passed. The future, whatever it held, was ours to face. Together.